Okay, so we are now live on YouTube, and we are now live on the Zoom webinar. And
Correct.
my name is Cesar Pereira. I'm the chair of the Brazilian branch of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. We are very happy today to be able to do something a little different from what we're all used to doing. This is a live webinar and everything, but it's not about your usual topics. We are very proud to have as our Director General worldwide at the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, Catherine Dixon, who had just a few weeks before finished 263 day and a few hours, and I'm sure those few hours were very long hours back then. Trip around the world on a tandem bicycle, and we are here to talk with her about that experience. And we are also very happy to have with us Edith Bertoletti, Flavia Bangi, and Adriana Pucci, who are very renowned practitioners, very recognized lawyers in dispute resolution and in other areas as well, and widely known in our community as athletes and people who are into an active life. And we couldn't have a better group to discuss and talk about this combination of sports in successful professional life than this lineup that we were able to put together here. Just to get this started, in half a minute here, I would like to tell you that I got into running. That's my sport, about 15 years ago. And I used to do 10Ks and half marathons, and I only did 3 marathons. I'm the junior here in this group in that regard. And in 2015, I had that why not moment, right? And I said, oh, okay, well, I've been doing half marathons. Why not try a marathon? So I joined Marcos Paulo Reis, a running team, the same one Flavia and Edith belonged to. And I practiced, and I thought that was going to be a one-off thing. Of course, like everybody else, I got hooked on the training and all that, the whole thing about these international marathons. So I've done 2 more. I was going to do one additional one this year, like everybody else, and mine got canceled as well. And so I'm looking forward to next year. And we'll probably talk about that, but I joined one of those virtual marathons also. And so I'm looking forward to that one before the actual one. But I just like you to introduce yourselves and talk about a little about sports and your professional life before we move to Catherine to tell us about her trip. Catherine, if you want to get started.
So hello, my name's Catherine Dixon. I'm the Director General of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. So I'm in the UK at the moment. I'm actually locked down in the UK, but we're just starting to very slowly emerge out of lockdown, at which point I'll actually get to see my offices in London for the first time, because I've been basically in lockdown since I started the role, and that was just really shortly after I got back from my ride, which I'm going to tell you about. Sport's always been a really important part of me and what I do. I suppose I started life as a runner. I did a lot of sort of athletics, starting middle distance. I was the army champion because I was in the army for a while, and then I gradually moved up to marathon, and I was fortunate enough to run the elite start at the London Marathon. So I've run some reasonably sort of competitive marathons, and then things started to, my back started to play up and various other bits and pieces. So I moved to cycling, and then which ultimately, I suppose, culminated in the world record attempt, which I started last year, which I'm going to talk to you about. But I've also done some triathlon as well. I've done an Ironman triathlon and various other bits and pieces. So the world record was, I suppose, that I'm going to tell you about, was the probably best achievement. But I've always loved sport, and I've always tried to combine my career and my working life with sport. It's always been very important to me.
Thank you. Oh, well, that's very impressive. I think I'm going to leave here. And Edith, if you can introduce yourself and talk about a little about your 17 marathons and all that.
Wow.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure, Catherine. I know well Flanagan and Cesar. I don't know personally Adriana, but well, my what if moment started just a few years earlier than Cesar. That's why I have 17 marathons. When I was 24, I started running and I enjoyed myself, and it was such a challenge. So I said, no, why not start running longer distance and challenging myself? So then year after year, I planned, organized it, and I did one international marathon every year. But for the 3 years that I had to carry my kids in my belly, and then I had to cancel the plan for the marathon those years. Running is part of me. I always loved sport as well. I played at high school, during like law school. I am also a volleyball player. Due to my short size, I ended up not being in the Brazilian team. So then I went to running, which is a sport that I love, and I think it's a very democratic one. I like to say that running is not about the pace, but about your own challenge. And we'll come to that, but I think what really inspires me is the level that you start and the level that you're able to achieve for yourself. So if you start at 2:15 and you end up with 2:10, you just increase it 5 minutes. If you start at 4:30 and then you go for 3:30, then you increase it, you improve it like 1 whole hour. And that's for me very impressive, and that's what I like to see. And also, by running, I have the opportunity to make good friends, and making good friends at a later stage in our life, I think it's such an unique experience. So I have to say that running is not only about like shedding those pounds, but also meeting amazing people throughout the way.
All right, Flavia, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Cesar. First of all, I would also like to thank Cesar for the kind invitation and the kind words in the introduction, and congratulate Edith, Adriana, who's joining us soon. It's a pleasure to share this panel with such a dear friends from sports. And also I'm thrilled to hear about Catherine's world record. Well, I have been a sports since my childhood. Throughout adolescence, my sport was more show jumping. I used to do horse show jumping and compete. I think I was at that time a bit better on that. I went to Brazilian National League. But then throughout law school, I started competing in track and field within our law schools. We had a law school competition in Brazil. So I started doing like short distance, and then I move on to 10K and then half marathon. And then at more or less around the time I was doing my PhD, I had a surgery on my feet. So I had to move all the way back again. So was kind of from one side of this time I had to focus on my professional life and finish writing my PhD. But then it stopped me for almost a year without running. So when I went back, I started to put in new goals. And before I was doing half marathons, and then I decided, well, now I should do a marathon. Maybe it didn't make sense, but it did make sense for me. And I managed to run 4 marathons since then without any pain on my right feet. Now I'm currently recovering from an injury in my left feet that I did on a mountain cruise I did last year, but it's always like that. Sometimes you do like 2 steps backwards and then you go a bit forward. And I think that's also like, for sports teaches me also a lot in the professional life. You don't run a marathon from one day to the other. You don't become an arbitrator from one day to the other. It's a process, and you have to put time, and you have to be constant, and that gives you resilience to keep working day to day and keep, and honestly, in running and in the legal field, especially in arbitration, there is no finish line. You're always learning new things, hearing about new cases. You have always to be out there in conference. And running, it's like Ajit said, it's not a matter of competing with others. I never reached an elite field, although I am registered for the London Marathon. I hope to run it next year because that was my marathon this year, which was canceled. But you compete with yourself. So every year you try to increase a little bit your pace or be more constant throughout the race. And that's the same with professional life, like especially in arbitration. We don't compete with others to get appointment. We do work together, and especially in an arbitral tribunal, we have to work together. And in the legal field in Brazil, I think we are very friendly with our colleagues, and this competition doesn't help. It's much better for you if you work together with your colleagues, and then everybody grows. So I think sports did show me a lot, and by running, I was always trying to do my best, run this extra mile, and that's the same thing I do in my professional life. I'm always trying to do my best, working a little bit extra, reading a new article, revising all the file, all the documents, all the footnotes, and basically that's, I think, what I will be doing for the next years, because there is no finish line.
Great, wonderful. Yeah, I think the whole concept that, as you have said, you have all said, of having a personal record, right? It's a very inspiring thing that, you know, that's your achievement, and you get a little better in a way, just looking to improve and not necessarily competing with the others, right? That's very interesting. And following with the program here, I'd like to turn to Catherine now, and and basically for her to tell us some things about her experience during the preparation and the fulfillment of this world record. And I'm sure when she looks back at those 263 days and some hours, many things come to mind, and I would imagine that there are many moments to remember that she and Ras, right, her partner in that trip, have thought, we will laugh about this later, right? Because there are probably many things that were not so much fun when they happened, but when you look back, then you laugh about it. And well, anyway, without taking more of Catherine's time, the floor is yours, Catherine.
Thank you, and thanks so much for inviting me along today. So, on the 18th of March of this year, I finished a world record attempt. So me and my cycling partner, we broke the world record for being the fastest ever around the globe on a tandem. So I'm just going to share a few photos, but just to give you a sense of what that looked like, and also I'm just going to show you the route. So just in terms of us, that's us. I'm the one on the front, and my cycling partner Raz is on the back, and we spent 263 days, 7 hours, 7 minutes, cycling around the world, and we were fortunate enough to beat the world record and be the fastest ever. So we actually beat the men's record by about 17 days, which was nice. I'll show you the route in a second. Cycled over 18,000 miles. So that was the minimum distance set by Guinness, so the Guinness Book of Records. We had to cycle 18,000 miles pretty much in one direction. So the rules are that you have to head either sort of east or west, and you also have to hit the Antipodean point of at some point in the world. So in other words, you have to sort of be at the other side of the world from not quite where you started, but you can't just sort of go do like round and round the North Pole. You have to actually sort of cross the globe. So I'll give you an idea of the route. So if I can just share that on screen for you as well. So we set off from the UK here, from Oxford, and we cycled, as you can see, across France. And at the time we set off, it was a bit of a heat wave actually in France. So certainly hot for us Brits, probably not so much for you. But we were glad to finally hit the coast of France and cycle along this nice little bit here, which is the French Riviera, before we got into into Italy. And Italy was wonderful. We managed to see a few sites. So we went past the Leaning Tower of Pisa. We went through Florence and we went up to Venice. And I remember one sort of magical evening ride where we went over a little causeway here into Venice, and the light was fading, and there was one of these massive cruise ships in the harbour that was dwarfing the whole of Venice. But it was very magical. We then crossed over, we went through Slovenia and then into Croatia and down the Croatian coast. Following the coastline here, there was a few mad drivers down this stretch of coastline, but the sunsets were very, very beautiful. We crossed, when we get there, we get to Dubrovnik there, and then we went into Montenegro. I'll just zoom out a little bit so you can see it. We crossed Montenegro in a day. So just to give you an idea, we're riding probably between 80 and 100 miles a day. So in kilometers, that's around 130 to 160. So it was quite a brutal schedule. We crossed Albania and then into Macedonia, where I remember the day there was an absolutely massive hill climb, and then into Greece. Where we went straight across Greece and into Turkey and arrived in Istanbul. And that was really Europe. So we'd cycled right across Europe at this point. And then we crossed the Bosphorus here and carried on through Turkey, through the mountains and to the Black Sea. And this here, we followed the Black Sea sort of along here, and there's some terrifying tunnels that literally every time we got through one, we'd sort of congratulate the fact that we were still alive, which was nice. And then we crossed the border here into Georgia, and then to Tbilisi. And from there, we took a flight. So we were able to take some flights if they were sort of public flights, because obviously, well, certainly as a Brit, we're not allowed in Iran, and it would have been sort of difficult for us to carry on from that point. So from there, we went to India. So we got a flight there, and we arrived, you can see, in India and Mumbai. And I remember the first day in Mumbai, sort of waking up in Mumbai, and the traffic is just frenetic, and everything is frenetic. The smells, the people, everything is just completely mad. And I think that there's no rules on the road in India at all. You just have to go with the flow, and there'll be people coming at you from the other side of the road. Nobody stops at any traffic lights, and everything just seems to work. But it was quite an experience to suddenly find ourselves on a bike riding through the center of Mumbai. And then we followed the coast around India. So this is when it started getting really wet, because interestingly, it was quite a lesson in some of the ways that our climate is changing. So the monsoons this year were really extended, and so we should have been kind of at the tail end of the monsoon, but we found ourselves sort of in the middle of it. And there've been lots of flooding, particularly around Goa and Kerala around here, where there was lots of people displaced. And we were riding for charity as well. So we were riding for motor neurone disease, which you might know as ALS. and also for Oxfam, which is a sort of a humanitarian and emergency relief charity. And they were actually doing lots of work in this area because lots of people had lost their homes as a consequence of flooding. And anyway, we came back up through India and all the way along the coast here to Calcutta. What was interesting about India was that we were followed everywhere we went, and we normally had lots of men on motorbikes following us and trying to film us, and we had on average about 25 selfie requests every day where they'd want us to stop and do a selfie with them. We even got stopped by the police, and we thought, oh dear, you know, what's this about? And it was actually because they wanted a selfie. If every time we stopped, we would have a gathering around us, which and everybody would want to, you know, it wasn't inappropriate with us, but they'd want to touch the bike, you know. So we called the bike Alice, and everybody would want to sort of touch Alice and check her brakes and various other bits and pieces, which became a bit exhausting actually after a time, you can imagine. So we went from Calcutta, and again we took a short flight to Southeast Asia. So we went into Myanmar here. So this is sort of Mandalay, and we rode through Myanmar, over the border into Thailand, Bangkok, and down, as you can see, through Malaysia and to Singapore. And again, still incredibly wet in this area. We saw lots of deforestation and things in Malaysia. You know, Thailand was the first place we could actually get a cheese sandwich after a number of months, which was very nice because there's lots of 7-Elevens there and things like that. But Myanmar was one of my favorite stretches actually. This bit here between Mandalay on the road effectively to Yangon was wonderful, and the Myanmar people are incredibly courteous, and it was like having some peace and quiet really after the frenetic activity in India. And then from there we went to Australia. So we flew to Perth, and you can see here we arrived in Perth, and what you don't realize about Australia, I think, is I mean, I've visited it before and I've been to the big cities, and what you don't realize is that actually there's not much in between the big cities. In fact, there's very, very little, and Perth is here, and this bit here, in fact, you can see that. Can you see that straight line there? That's the longest, straightest road probably in the world actually, and it's across the Nullarbor Desert, and the distances here between any points are more than 100 miles. So certainly, you know, 120 miles sometimes between road houses where you can actually get water and food and things. So we were riding quite long distances here, and it was very hot. It was probably up to about 45 degrees centigrade. So, you know, pretty hot, and long, having to carry lots of water. So the bike was very, very heavy. And in fact, that picture, I'll just show you, I'll just stop the share for a second and just show you a different share. But this one here, that's us going across the Nullarbor Desert, and you can see there's not a great deal. There's a few bushes and things, but this sort of red soil, you know, and very, very long stretches of road. Lots of roadkill. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. Just pick up the route again. There we go. So yeah, so we went to Adelaide here. So across, so that distance between Perth and Adelaide is about 1,700 miles, just to give you an idea. Then to Melbourne, and then the plan was that we were going to go to Sydney, and then we're going to go up the coast. And I don't know if you recall, but in sort of November, December, there was a massive amount of bushfires in Australia, and we were there at that time. So rather than coming, this is where all the fires were. So rather than being able to go up the coast, we had to go inland. And this area here is an area of drought in Australia, where it hadn't rained since 2016. So it was pretty hot and pretty dusty. And the reason there was no fires there was wasn't a great deal to burn anymore. But so we came up here and we arrived in Brisbane. And from there, we went to New Zealand. So we crossed New Zealand, which is incredibly beautiful, but has some of the world's worst drivers. So if you're ever thinking of a cycling trip in New Zealand, I can't recommend that you go on the road. Go on the trails, but we had to be on the road. So we rode through the South Island and then through the North Island and up to Auckland here, where we then got a flight to the States. So we're getting a little bit closer to you guys. So we arrived in San Francisco. This is probably sort of early January, so late December, early January. So it was winter, and we cycled down the coast because the idea was that we were going to take the southern route, because obviously it was quite cold and we were on a bike and sometimes camping and things. So we went down to Los Angeles, and then we started cutting across. We spent the day in Mexico, which was wonderful, apart from trying to get back into the States again. And they don't, I think it's safe to say that the border guards don't particularly like people, going into Mexico and trying to get back again. So we had a bit of a long wait there, and then we crossed the states, so across Arizona into Texas, and then we sort of hit the deep south. We were following. We followed and saw quite a lot of the wall being built, which was quite a scary prospect, quite honestly. Absolutely massive, sort of along this border here. So that's the Mexican border, and then we sort of carried on through. This is Texas. I'll just zoom in a little bit so you can see it, because obviously the States is pretty big. Louisiana. We had a day off in New Orleans, which was very exciting. We had to get the bike fixed, so we had a day off. That was our only day off in the States. So we were riding practically every day, and then through Mississippi, Alabama, and then into Florida, and then we rode down to Miami here. Which I think is probably the closest we got to you guys. And then we, from there, we headed back. So we're now on the kind of last leg. So we flew to Morocco. And this is Casablanca. So we went Casablanca up the coast into Morocco and into Spain. And it was really at this point that we were starting to get really worried about COVID, because we were hearing obviously the reports, and it was really around this time that Europe was starting to think about locking down. And obviously, if we'd have got caught in that, then that would have been the end of the world record. So we rode through Spain, kind of across the mountains to Madrid. We then sort of headed for the French coast. So we went over the Pyrenees here, and this is Beirut just here to give you an idea. And this is the sort of French border. And really, when we got up here, so we're just following this coast, this is relatively flat, thank goodness, was when France started to really lock down. So Spain had probably locked down at this point, so we just got out of Spain in time. France was, all the cafes and restaurants were shutting, so there was very few places that we can actually stop and get any food, which is a bit of a problem when you're riding all day. And then we got here, and we had probably a day, 2 days riding, and this was when France sort of made the announcement that they were locking down the next lunchtime. So we had literally a few hours to get out of France. So we jumped on a train. Half of the train got cancelled. We ended up shoving the tandem into one of these coaches, where they have the luggage storage underneath, and we managed to get the bike under that, and then we headed to the coast. And we were allowed to do that because fortunately by this stage we'd done more than 18,000 miles, so we knew that we'd done the requisite mileage, and we headed to the coast and then back. By this point, France has locked down. We got to the UK. The UK still carried on as normal. And then we had a day's ride, and this was a day's ride back up to Oxford, where we started, and we finished, as I say, on the 18th of March. 263 days, 7 hours and 7 minutes was the time we did in the end. And Guinness has will shortly be announcing, but you know, that's the sort of new world record. The men's record was 281 days, so we were pleased that you know, we'd managed to beat the men. So that was nice, and that was our trip.
All right. And I had a specific question about preparation. Like when you take such a long trip around such diverse places, how accurate was your preparation to determine what you were going to face in all those places, or did you just have to trust your instincts and improvise a lot?
Yeah, so what we had to do in advance, because it was a world record, we had to submit the route in advance, but we were only broadly following that route. So we knew, where we were going, and each day we would route plan for the next day. So it was literally, we would say, okay, you know, where's the next town or village or somewhere we can stay and get some food that is 80 or more miles away. And so we would plan for each day. In terms of the stuff we took, you know, we were trying to carry the minimum amount of stuff. You know, we had some spares, obviously, for the bike, which we carried. We had some, you know, obviously some cycling gear. You know, we did suffer a little bit because our shorts kind of got very holy in Asia, because we were able to get any new ones because we couldn't get them through customs. But we were pretty much planning, I think, on a day-to-day basis where we were going to go, and you know, but with a broad overview of the route that we were taking. And I think, to be honest, that's the only way you can do it, because you don't know what you're going to be faced with each day. So if I'd have said, well, we're going to plan and we're going to be in this you know, next 263 days, this is exactly where we're going to stop, then, you know, realistically that wouldn't have worked. So yeah, you've got to be quite flexible, I think.
You know, we on the flyer for this program, we had a quote from Murakami regarding this idea of making doing your best and exerting yourself to the fullest when you run, and that would, he says, it's a metaphor for life. There is another book that you're certainly familiar with, Flanagan's Run, which is about it's a fictional run, but it's based on a real one in the early 19 well, it's around 1930s, in the 1930s. But it's a 3,000-mile run across the U.S. And, and basically, at one point in the book, they say the winner doesn't think of the 3,000 miles, thinks only of the next one. And do you think, in addition to the actual preparation, as you mentioned, for the world record and everything, but psychologically, do you think you focus on the next day, and you pretty much forget that you have 262 more to go, and when you're doing something?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were, you know, there's something about living in the moment, isn't there? You know, and rather than necessarily thinking about what you're going to be doing the following week. And one of the things said before I set off is that, you know, we're going to kind of enjoy every moment of this and not be thinking, oh, well, you know, next week we'll be at so-and-so, you know, and that'll be really great. So I think try to treat every day as a new adventure. And you know, and the thing about it was, you know, you didn't know what was going to happen, who you were going to meet, what you were going to see, and something happened sort of every day. And when I was, you know, riding, I actually did a daily blog which we put on Facebook, and it's called Tandem Wow. And you know, you can kind of look over. We had quite a lot of people sort of following us, and you know, when you look back on it, you know, there was something different and some new people, and you know, and it was planned on a day-to-day basis, even though we had a big overarching plan, which was obviously breaking the world record and you know, cycling the amount of distance that we needed to cycle. But it was, you know, every day really, and it was hard because, you know, we were doing a lot of mileage and we'd had very few rest days. So we cycled across the States with one rest day. We cycled around India with one rest day. And generally the rest days were because we needed to do some bike maintenance. And, you know, so obviously we, you know, from time to time we needed to service the bike. But, you know, we had very, very few days off. So.
And before I turn to Flavia and Edith, well, aside from the COVID problem that you mentioned toward the end, were there moments in which you feared that you would have to quit because things were not working, or was there that type of difficulty, or things pretty much fell into place according to the plan?
No, there was all sorts of difficulties, but you never for 1 second thought we're not going to do it. You know, I mean, you can't set off to do something like that thinking, oh, will we, won't we? You have to be pretty single-minded. You know, you have to sort of keep the what you're trying to achieve in mind. And you know, I mean, I suppose we had some mechanical issues, you know. I mean, fortunately, I mean, when I set off, the two things that I was most worried about were things, you know, were falling off, because obviously, I mean, I was the pilot as well, so I piloted the whole way around. So in other words, I'm the person at the front doing all the steering, and then getting ill. And obviously, because we were going through some countries where you know, the food is perhaps not what we're used to. You know, we were kind of worried about that. And we did have a couple of days where, interestingly, Raz had a day in the States where she obviously ate some pasta that didn't agree with her, and it was the day that we're riding over the Big Sur. And I think I you know, it's quite hilly on the Big Sur. It's down that California coast, and I think I probably suffered more than her because she was just sort of sitting on the back, not pedaling very hard. But and we had to go over a number of mountains. But you know, we also, you know, had a couple of days when we weren't that well because we'd eaten something. Fortunately, we didn't fall off. Which you know, was great, because obviously some of the places we rode, it was quite dodgy, you know, road conditions and things. But in actual fact, the things that were more difficult were the external things. So like the bushfires in Australia, you know, you couldn't have anticipated that, you know, the monsoons, you know, because we were so wet every day, and you know, and obviously it's quite difficult riding when you have very, very bad saddle sore, which we did because of the wet. And you know, and then obviously we weren't anticipating being chased by a global pandemic through Europe. So, you know, it was that sort of stuff that you know, that was out of your control, that was more worrying.
Yeah, this part at the end must have been scary, and especially like the prospect of maybe being locked down and
yeah,
and having
but
this
you know,
whole,
but we kind of didn't realize how bad it was until, you know, because the thing was, we were riding every day, and we're in France, and so we weren't seeing the news, you know, all the time, you know, which you would do probably if you were at home. And so we were just sort of looking at our phones at the end of the day, thinking, oh, you know, this is getting a bit serious. And what we didn't know was that we got the second to last passenger ferry out of France. So it was actually getting a bit close.
It almost became a triathlon. Then you would have to do some swimming back home.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we could probably have got out maybe at another port, but the port that we went to, you know, we would have probably, that was the last passenger ferry, and you know, we only got on it because we were on a bike rather than in a vehicle. And so, you know, we were quite fortunate really not to get stuck. And I think we would have, if we'd have been in Spain, they banned, as part of the lockdown, they banned cycling in Spain. So that would have been hugely problematic. We'd have probably, if we hadn't got out of Spain, if we'd have been on our original schedule, which was just to beat the men's record by a day, we would have got we would have been locked down in Spain, and we're probably only just coming out now, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have to be lucky too, right?
Yeah. But I suppose it goes to the things that, you can have the best planning in the world, and I'm not saying that we did, because we, to be honest, there's quite a lot of being able to do things as they arise. But even if you had, if something like that happens, you can't control it. It's the things that you can't control, really, and there's no point in worrying about them because you can't control them. So.
Yeah, well, that's a good it's a good insight, actually, right? Not only for sports, but for things in general. You should
control the things that you can, that you can control,
and
yeah,
play along
it's sort
with
of hope for the best, plan for the worst. That's my sort of motto, really.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, thank you. And I'd like to turn to Edith. Tell us something about her experiences with these various marathons and everything that's involved in all the training and the effort and the injuries and everything. And
I will speak 1 second about me and then ask a question for Catherine, because after that amazing explanation of her world tour, it's any marathon seems very small, but well, every time because you're not only doing like a global tour, you're like going for the world record, which makes everything very different. Is when you're like running a marathon, you want to beat your pace. It's not about how you achieve the 42K, but I want to achieve under a certain pace. And at those moments, sometimes you self-doubt yourself. I will be able to keep that pace. And at certain moments, either early on or in the middle of the race, you start kind of questioning myself, and then you have this struggle, your body versus your mind, and your mind tells your body, yes, you can do it, but that's you against you. And what really makes me curious about your experience, Catherine, is about the tandem part of your experience. How was this dealing with your partner? Did you have any doubts that your partner had to help you with, or were you more motivated than her, or was really like one day embedded, she was more down? How was this whole experience after 363 days?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what if you're ever planning on going around the world on the tandem, make sure you do it with a really good friend, because I think that's really important. And I think we knew each other pretty well. We're good friends. We'd ridden a lot together. So and I think we kept each other motivated, because I mean the worst scenarios is if you're both having a bad moment, really, and occasionally, and it was normally about being really, really tired or really, really hungry, normally hungry, and you get that sort of you know what it's like when you suddenly need food. You can get that, sometimes people call it hanger, where you've really got to eat, and it's really, if you don't, it could be quite. And we had a few moments like that, and it was normally about, are we going to stop here? No, we're not, but for the most part we got on incredibly well, and we worked together as a team. And I think when you're on a tandem, it's a sort of a team effort. And I was piloting, Raz, my partner, you've seen her on the photo. She was doing all the navigation. She also took loads of photos and did lots of footage, because we needed quite a lot of evidence to go to Guinness, evidencing where we'd been. And we'd listen to, we'd do things on the bike. We'd either chat, or we'd listen to an audio book, or we'd listen to some music. And because we were riding for charity as well, we did some dedicated days for some of the people that we were, that particularly with suffering from MND. So ALS, I think I know it's known as ALS in the States, so I'm not sure whether you know it as MND or ALS. But anyway, we did some dedicated days for them, and I think we just kept each other. We kept each other going, and we had a bit of a routine as well, and that's quite important. And and yeah, and we're obviously great friends, and it's something that obviously we achieved together. So yeah, I don't know, maybe that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Catherine.
Had you two done anything, of course not that big, but anything like that before? Any joint sport activities like that, or any other tandem?
Yeah, I mean, we've done quite a bit of, so we're not, I mean, you can't really prepare for something like that in some ways, because it's very difficult to sort of almost train for it. I mean, obviously we did train for it, but we did a lot of riding together. We did quite a lot of stuff in the Alps, so going over into continental Europe to the French Alps, and where there's some big mountains, and we did quite a lot of training there, and but we hadn't done anything really sort of long before together. So that was a bit of an unknown, but it worked. It worked well, and obviously, we kept each other going. I mean, it is hard though. I mean, I you do, as an athlete, you do sort of suffer. I mean, I had something called overtraining syndrome, which, it's basically when your adrenal glands are not working in the way that they should, and you get quite a lot of stress hormone because you're putting your body under a lot of stress. And, so that I had that, which, probably from around the center of the States, which made it quite challenging. I mean, you'd still get up and you'd ride every day, and you were still doing the sort of mileage, 80 to 100 every day. But partly it was getting the right sort of nutrition, and I found that incredibly difficult in the States. There's, food wise, it's kind of known that there's a bit of a food desert where you're going to have fried chicken and kind of white bread, which doesn't really agree with me, quite honestly. So that those sort of things are a challenge, getting food, because there's limited places where you can stop, and that was one of the biggest challenges for me, the nutrition.
That's interesting. I understand you had more problems with that across the U.S. than in some other that we would imagine to be more remote places.
Completely. Yeah, completely. I mean, obviously, Australia had its own challenges because that, it is very remote. But I think if you're in most, what we sometimes term as developing countries, there tends to be lots of markets with lots of fruit and veg, and actually you can buy lots of bananas and fruit and the stuff. I mean, India with its curries, kind of when you're having curry for breakfast, lunch and dinner, can be a little bit much, but there is a lot of sort of vegetables and stuff that you can eat. I didn't find that so much in the States. It's quite interesting actually that I suffered more in the States in that middle bit, so not so much California and places, but kind of once you get into sort of the deep south, kind of Louisiana, Mississippi, and part of Florida, it is very much a sort of a fast food culture, which just doesn't really agree with me. I can't sustain that, particularly when you're doing that sort of mileage every day. Sort of fried stuff doesn't really work for me. So got back to Morocco and loads of markets and lots of cafes, and it was like, oh, wonderful. So interesting.
Well, I'd like to turn to Flavia a bit now. Flavia and I last year we had an idea, and we put together something which was a race that was connected with one of the big arbitration conferences in São Paulo, and we partnered with the Brazilian Arbitration Committee, which is called CIArb. In that, I'm going to show you this here, and we did the CIArb run, in which we hope it will become something regular that we will do connected with the arbitration conferences, and as a means to bring people together. We had a pretty good turnout last year, and we hope that will continue. And I know Flavia has been training, and she mentioned that before, for a series of marathons. She's now training to do a triathlon as well. And I just like to start with something that is also in Murakami's book. He mentions that people keep asking him what he thinks about when he's running, because when you do these long runs or these long stretches, what are you thinking about? And so that's what I'd like to start asking you, Flavia. What do you think about when you are practicing, when you're doing a marathon, and how does that interact with your other activities?
Thanks, Cesar. First, I would like to congratulate Catherine. It's impressive. Like when you see the map, like even like by car, that would be already impressive. I was really like, congratulations. Thank you for your question, Cesar. It's interesting because I think I'm those who actually do not think while I am running. I usually don't run with music. And okay, I might think about like my to-do list and everything in the very beginning, but at a certain point, I think I get into a flow, then I do live the moment. And maybe some thoughts might come and go, but I don't have something that I do think about. And I always try to, like even in a marathon, try to think on if thoughts comes, I try to think on the next kilometer or 5 kilometers. I do not try to think, oh, it's still like 30 kilometers to go, but like really trying to enjoy the moment. And I think it's good because like it keeps my pace. And sometimes when I'm chatting with friends or like I'm just like listening to something else, either I do run faster or slower. I kind of like just completely lose what I'm supposed to do because I start thinking on something else. Even I'm currently biking a lot because of quarantine. That's what we can do like at home. And even here, most of the times I'm just trying to focus on the training itself and not like watching TV or movies or series. I'm definitely training on Zwift, like with everybody. I see here friends that trains with me watching, and especially Edith's sisters. So mostly I'm just trying to focus at what I'm doing, not thinking something else. I do have a question for Catherine, and just maybe to switch a bit the topic. How did you manage to put the World Record in your agenda? Because I think it's maybe easier when you only work as counsel, because then in your law firm, you might be able, your partners might be able to step in the cases you are currently handling. But how did you handle your work as arbitrator? Because I understand you sit a lot as an arbitrator. Did you stop accepting appointments some years before? How did you plan? Because especially in Brazil, you can, like when you accept an appointment, that might take 1 year, or it might take 3 years. So it's difficult to put in your agenda something like that when you do have work that is basically personal work. You cannot delegate it to your partner or someone else.
Yeah, so I suppose I've been a sort of CEO really for the last probably 10 years. So just to give you an idea, I'm a lawyer and I'm a mediator. I was general counsel sort of for a number of organisations, spent a bit of time in Canada, and I ran the Law Society of England and Wales. I also ran the organisation that indemnified our National Health Service, so like the insurer for the National Health Service. And I was running a sort of a large, I suppose, educational institution, sort of further education, higher education, so everything through from, quite a low level through to master's degrees. And I gave up my job to do it because that was what I wanted to do. It was a personal thing that I wanted to achieve. And I kind of work on the basis that I mean, I was lucky that I was able to do that, and I worked on the basis that fingers crossed I'd get another job. And I was approached about the role at the institute when I was in India. So I was riding and ended up doing an interview on Skype when I was in the States in Tombstone. And then fortunately was offered the job. So I actually came back to a new job. So, you know, that's how I did it. I appreciate that wouldn't work for everybody, but, you know, I think I sort of work on the basis that life's too short, and, you know, you don't want to look back on it and have regrets. And I've always wanted to ride around the world, and you know, I'm sort of in my 50s now, so, you know, you kind of think, well, if I'm going to break a world record, I don't, you know, I can still do it now, but maybe in a few years' time it might be more challenging. So, you know, now was the time for me really to do it. So that's what I did.
Thank you.
Catherine, we have a question here from our friend Andres Mugni. You talked a little about your preparation for the trip, and he asked specifically, how did you choose the kind of gear you would use? I understand you had quite a lot of experience with cycling before this trip, right? So I imagine you were very familiar with the gear, and even with fixing your Alice bike there,
Alice,
and all that was involved, right?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, there's kind of two lots of gear, I suppose, in some ways. There's obviously your bike, you know. So we had we worked with a specialist tandem provider, and had a bespoke bike built, and we were very careful about the specification for that bike. So, for example, it had a steel frame, which meant it was a bit heavier, but it also meant that if we broke it, we could actually mend it when we were on the route, because one of the rules of Guinness is that you have to be on the same bike all the way around the world. So a carbon bike or an aluminium bike was, you know, it's much easier to break those sort of bikes. And we also looked at the sort of spec, and the sort of spec that we got with the sort of things where you could get replacements around the world. So it wasn't top spec. So we thought very carefully about that. In terms of the stuff that we carried with us, we tried to keep the weight to a minimum. So we did have camping gear, and we also had, we had one set of clothes that we could wear off the bike, and then, our cycling gear. We were sponsored for our cycling gear, so that was nice, and we did get some sponsorship, for the bike and things. But it was just really keeping it to a minimum. But we did have one luxury item each. My luxury item was an espresso making, like a little mini espresso maker. And Raz's was a speaker that we could put on the bike, so we could listen to music and books and things. And those were our luxury items. And but the rest of it was camping gear. It was all lightweight stuff, waterproof panniers. And we had one pair of shoes, which were a pair of sandals that we wore, that had SPD, so that you can clip into the pedals, and we wore them all around the world, and that was the only pair of shoes we had. And so yeah, socks and sandals, which is not necessarily the most attractive look, but we wore socks and sandals when it was cold.
All right. Well, we're approaching the end of our time here, and before we close, I would like to just comment that Adriana Pucci, who was also one of our panelists, had some connection problems. She was not able to join as a panelist, but she was, in fact, and she is connected with us as an attendee, so she's listening to us. And so before, and one more thing, you may have noticed I'm wearing here CIArb pin, and that's pretty much the last question I'd like to ask Catherine as our new Director General worldwide. Adriana Pucci, Flavia Mangi, Edith Bertoletti, and many of our friends here from the audience. They're very experienced practitioners, and I know many of them, the ones who are not yet part of the Chartered Institute, are thinking about it and considering the possibility of becoming more involved and learning more about the Institute. And so I'd like to just as a closing, if you could talk a little about the Chartered Institute and about the benefits of learning more and becoming more involved in following our programs, and maybe joining as a member, if you could, please.
No, thank you. Well, so the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators is a global community of dispute resolvers. We provide training and development through to chartered status, but generally through to fellow level. So you can join as an associate member, become a member, or a fellow. The education is very sort of practical and relevant to what you do in practice. And once you qualify, depending on the level, you get different letters after your name, so what we call post-nominals, which are recognized around the globe. We've got 41 different branches around the globe, but we also operate in many countries, and that qualification is recognized around the globe and enables you with the right I suppose experience to get access to lots of different panels, so that you can get work. But also it's a community, so there's lots of opportunities for developing your practice, for networking with other sort of like-minded individuals, and really sort of progressing your practice, and whether to support you through your membership journey. So if you are interested, then please do get in touch, and we can provide you, either Caesar or myself can provide you with a bit more information. And it'll be great to see you at the next sort of member event.
Thank you. We just received a comment from Ola Naji, and it's significant that we did, because Ola on social media was one of the most enthusiastic supporters of this event. She is an LLM student in London, from Egypt, and everything that she wrote on social media was very inspiring about this initiative. And what did she say? What she's saying here is exactly in line with what I mentioned that Flavia and I did regarding the arbitration committee in Brazil. And she's suggesting here that we should join sports and the Chartered Institute together, and have something like a CIArb sports events, or CIArb marathon or something. Well, let's think about that. Maybe we can have a CIArb run next time, probably a virtual one this semester. But
I think I'll go by bike rather than running nowadays. So I think my running days are over. But yeah, I mean, it'd be nice, wouldn't it, to sort of get together and do some sport. I think sport brings people together. It's a great way of of meeting people and having some common cause. So I love sort of combining it with my work. Even if sometimes it slightly gets out of kilter when you leave your job to go cycling around the world, but it's always been very important to me, that's for sure.
All right. Well, with this message, we will close, and I thank Edith Bertoletti, Flavia Manja, Adriana Pucci, and especially Catherine Dixon for sharing some of her experience here with us. And I'd like to invite all of you to follow the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, either by looking up the website in London, or following us here in the Brazilian branch. And I welcome you to our many more planned events along the next months. Okay? Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Cesar.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.